Well, I want to invite you, if you are at all handy, or if you would like to become handy. We've been doing a lot of improvements around the facility here, and God, through your generosity and through just His timing, has brought an opportunity here for us to do some things that we've long wanted to do, and then also some things that we kind of dreamed of doing. And so if you haven't, by the way, if you haven't gone through and seen what the kids' classrooms and stuff look like, don't go while kids' church is going on. But maybe afterwards, just poke your head in and see. There's some neat things. The ministry center looks totally different. Our kids' classrooms look totally different. And next Monday, a week from tomorrow, we have a crew coming in here to do some of the work that we're needing to do in here. We're doing some revamping of the stage and a couple other things in the facility here, which means next weekend, we need to be ready for them. So if you have some time that you would give us after church on Sunday, that would be fantastic. I will make sure that we have some pizza or something good. It seems like pizza feeds a work crew, right? So I'll make sure we have some pizza, something good, and we just want to spend a few hours doing the work that we need to do, tearing some things out. We've got some rip up of the stage that we need to do and some other things. So if you would be willing to help with that, we would love that. And you don't have to, but if you just sent me an email or Andy or the church office or shot us a text and said, hey, I'm planning to be there, that would help us know how to plan. Maybe bring some gloves and we'll do some work. Sound good? Sound like fun? Yeah. So it is unrelated to that we're talking about this morning. The wait is over, although many of the things that we're doing here have been long-awaited things. But I was thinking about this idea of waiting, and I was thinking about my son, Zach. Zach was born into waiting. When he was first born, I have a picture of his legs when he was about 2 minutes old. He was born, and that was when we discovered that his feet hadn't developed quite right in the womb, and he was born with a club foot, you can see here. So it was turned at a 90-degree angle to his leg. And so it was pretty amazing. They saw it right away. They said, don't know if that'll straighten out. It's interesting, babies are crammed in there, right? So this one's also turned, but this one kind of straightened out on its own. But this one was turned way too far and required special help. And there's others in this room who have had club feet and know what that process is like. And so we, before he was 24 hours old, we had met with a couple pediatric specialists in it and a pediatric podiatrist specialist who said, all right, here's the treatment plan. And by about 20 hours old, he was already in his first cast. And he was, every week, we were going in and changing out that cast. They were pulling his foot over. At 6 weeks old, they took a scalpel and sliced his Achilles tendon. Can you believe that that's the treatment? But so it amazes me how God designs the body. That's not what we're talking about. But God's design of the body. So they cut his Achilles tendon because it was too short. It was like his toe was pointed like this, so it needed to be lengthened. So they cut his Achilles tendon, pull his foot up like that, and put it in a cast. So it's like the sliced ends of the tendon are apart, right? And 12 days later, they went back and took that cast off. And those two cut ends of the Achilles tendon had found each other and knit together, and he could move his foot again. It was amazing. So at 8 weeks old, his foot was straight and where it needed to be. The issue is, much like when you have braces, but then you have a retainer, it's where it should be, but it'll go back over time if you don't keep it where it needs to be. And so Zach grew up 24/7, 365. His first year of life, he had boots on his feet with a bar in between. And that was sleeping, that was eating. It was amazing. I didn't know babies could have abs, but he like had a six-pack as a baby. It was crazy because he was used to lifting this heavy metal bar, and you could hold him like this and he would just lift it up over his head. It was pretty incredible. But it comes time to crawl, and he's got a bar between his feet, and he's wiggling his butt and figuring out how to crawl. And then it's time to walk. I have a video of him walking with his bar on. There is sound if you want to hear cute baby sounds. Look at that. Isn't that crazy? That's what we said. We said he's going to grow up to be a professional snowboarder like this. Yep. So he had to do that for the first year of life, but then after that, after 1 year old, he could take the boots off, but he still had to wear them anytime he was sleeping. So when he was up and going around, he could have them off, but every nap time, every bedtime, it was strap the boots back on and try to go to sleep like that. And it was every day. And then he hit the age where he could take them off because they buckled on. And so when he was young, they were just kind of stuck there. But then he hit the age, and he was never angry about it. But like we went in to check on him, he had fallen asleep, and we found he had just taken them off, set them up next to his alarm clock, and was sleeping there with his legs apart. The freedom that we wanted. No, have to put these back on for 4 years, waiting for the doctor to say, all right, you're good. You don't have to wear those boots anymore. It's pretty neat, I have to tell you. It's pretty neat when I watch him running around in here, thinking about what he was born with. And so at 4 years old, he finally was able to get the doctor's okay. The doctor went and looked at him, and we thought it wasn't going to be until he was 5. We weren't sure, but that was the timeline we thought we were on. And then he goes in for the checkup, and the doctor says, nope, you're good. You don't have to wear the boots anymore. I was like, yes, I can't believe it. So this morning we're talking about the wait is over. Because in Zach's life, that was all he knew, was waiting to hear that good news. But he had some benefits because he knew, and we knew, he was excited. Maybe mom and dad were even more excited to not have to mess with those boots anymore. But we knew the timeline generally, and we knew the process generally. So we were waiting, but we knew what was at the end. But what we're looking at in Joseph's life is Joseph is waiting, and he doesn't know the timeline. He doesn't know the steps in the process. We had a doctor we were meeting with regularly who was saying, well, it'll look like this, and it'll look like this, and it'll look like this. Joseph didn't have that. He's been waiting and waiting this whole time. And today, finally, after weeks and weeks of following his progression, finally, things are about to turn out right for this guy. But what we want to learn this morning, what we want to see in Joseph's life is, how do we grow? Remember, we're talking about pursuing growth. How do we grow and stay ready for when the time comes? How do we grow through that waiting time so that we're prepared when the wait is finally over? And it starts with this. It starts with recognizing that timing is in God's hands. Timing is in God's hands. We're going to read what happens here, some longer chunks. I won't have you stand for them this morning. We're going through Genesis chapter 41, but I would like you to turn there. So pull out a Bible from under a chair near you. Turn there in the Bible you brought with you. Turn there on your phone. Genesis chapter 41, and we're going to see what happens as God's timing finally works out in Joseph's life. Now, I'll remind you, quick thumbnail sketch, grew up in father's house. Father loved him more than his brothers. Doesn't work out well for sibling relationships. Brothers want to kill him, eventually settle on selling him into slavery. He goes off to Egypt, never to be heard from again. He shows up down in Egypt as a slave, rises to prominence in his master's house there. Things are going fairly well until false accusation against him by his master's wife. He gets thrown in prison, and he's been rotting in prison. And last week, we saw these two people, the baker, this is like a melodrama. The baker. Have you guys ever been to a melodrama? So when the good guy comes out, all in white, you cheer for him. Oh, who cares what winds up happening? We like him because he's a baker. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the baker and some other guy are thrown in there and into prison. They have a dream, or they have two different dreams, and Joseph, through God interprets the dream through Joseph as the mouthpiece and tells them what's going to happen, and it doesn't really matter what happens to the baker at that point. Maybe he's the boo-hiss guy. But remember, Joseph tells the cupbearer, who his is the good result, he's going to wind up being one of Pharaoh's advisors again. And he tells him, hey, remember me when you get back there, because I was sold into slavery that I didn't deserve. Now I'm in jail for something I didn't do. Get me out of here. The cupbearer goes back to be one of Pharaoh's advisors and promptly forgets all about Joseph, and he continues in jail. And that's where we pick it up. Genesis chapter 41 says this. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears thin and scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servant and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. Thank you. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now, a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams to us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. And we'll pause there. The timing of all of this is in God's hands. Do you see where it starts out? In the very first verse, it says, "Now it happened at the end of 2 full years." I think the author of Genesis has the word full there for a reason. Because this has been a long time leading up to this for Joseph. Because he's sold into slavery at 17 years old. And then somewhere along the line, he goes from the best he can be as a slave to thrown into jail again. And then at 28 years old, so 11 years later, is when he tells the cupbearer, "Please remember me when you wind up back in Pharaoh's employ," right? And then there's 2 full years of waiting. 2 full years. What do you think those years were full of for Joseph? Misery. Yeah. What? Turmoil, yeah. Fear, undoubtedly. Loneliness. Yeah, questioning God. I thought, because remember, Joseph had these dreams at the beginning of his life that he was going to be something great, that his family was going to wind up bowing down to him, that he was the chosen one of God, and here I am every day rotting in this prison. God, where are you? But the timing is in God's hands fully and completely. One of the things that probably was going on in Joseph's prayer life was, "Okay, God, it's been plenty of time. Can you get to the next part of the plan?" Right? I've got it. Whatever lessons you have for me, I've learned them all. So can we go ahead and get to the "you're doing something good in my life" thing, right? And then wake up the next day. The timing isn't his to control. I think it's so interesting that you don't see it in a negative light, but Joseph does what he can to try to control it. Hey, I have this opportunity with this advisor of Pharaoh. Hey, remember me. But it wasn't God's timing yet. I was thinking about this. I was thinking about David in his life. He writes Psalm 31 as he's again under attack. I was anointed young, David's life, anointed young to be the king of Israel, and yet I'm running for my life. Everyone, everywhere I go, wants to kill me. I'm depressed. I'm alone. I'm running. And he writes Psalm 31 talking about this, but then he turns a corner, as often as Psalms do, and he says, "But I'm going to trust in you." And at the beginning of verse 15 of Psalm 31, David says, "My times are in your hand." That's what trust looked like for David. That's what trust looked like for Joseph. All right, the timing of all of this, I can't control it. The timing's in God's hands. So let's talk practically about this for a minute, because normally this means that we wind up waiting longer than we would like to for things, and we'll come back to that. But sometimes it might mean needing to be pushed out of our comfort zone. Sometimes if we waited till we were comfortable, we would never do what God wants us to do. Sometimes surrendering to God's timing means when God speaks, we're ready, even if we don't feel ready. But often it also means that God isn't doing what we want in our time, and it's hard to be waiting. I've said this before, but if the voice that you're hearing is telling you, "Hurry up, make this decision right away, rush into it," that voice most often is not God's voice. Because God's voice most often is the voice that's slower in our lives than we would want things to be. And we wind up waiting. Sometimes just feeling stuck. Practically, it means that we're going to be frustrated that God isn't doing what we think he should be doing. So what does it look like to have growth during that time? I was thinking about how similar it is to being a child. How often when you were a kid did you wait for your parents? How often did you feel like, I'm ready to do this, and your parents thought, no, you aren't ready yet? I'm ready to make my own decisions on what I eat and don't eat. I'm ready to have a phone. I'm ready to go with those people alone or go to that party or go to that whatever. And I feel like I'm ready. But what's interesting is when we're a kid, we feel like, man, I'm ready now to take on these adult things, and I wish you would let me. But then once you hit adulthood, often you look back at childhood with this fondness of, oh, that childishness, man, I miss that. When somebody else was the responsible party making the decisions, somebody else was looking out for me, just the simplicity of being able to play and enjoy life. Jesus characterizes faith as childlike, and I think that that's part of it. All right, God's got this in his hands. God's got the timing. God has it under control. I can rest and wait. We found a few summers ago as a family that we really enjoy Great America. And it's fun to go down. And if you think about going to a theme park, what happens if you're going with kids? You pull into the parking lot, and the kids want to run and go in, right? And it's the boring adults who are like, we need to put on sunscreen, we need to gather this, get the water, get the this and that. No, hurry up, let's go, right? But then, what would happen if the adults weren't responsible? You're a couple hours in and you're already sunburned or dehydrated or whatever, and often that's us with God. Like, I see the thing that's next, I want to just get to it right now, and God's like, yeah, but you need some sunscreen first, right? The timing's in God's hands, and often it's hard for us to see and recognize that growth, maturity, means being able to see that God's hands are on the situation, and he's the one who should be controlling the timing and not us. The timing is in God's hands. Well, so then what do I control? Well, you get to control something. Readiness, being ready, that is in our hands. The timing's in God's hands, but readiness is in our hands. Let me continue reading what happens here. Verse 14 of Genesis 41. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it's not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marshlands. Lo, 7 ugly cows and lean and da. All right, let's go down to verse 24. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Verse 25. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years, and the dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is that as I have spoken to Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them, 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dreams to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now, let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposals seem good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. So we can't manipulate the timing, but we can stay ready for when God's timing comes. We see a few things here. And Joseph, he finally gets his opportunity. He's finally in front of Pharaoh. And what he says, it makes really good sense to Pharaoh. Of course it does. Do you hear what he's proposing? He's like, there's going to be 7 great years. Why don't you tax everybody at a rate of 20%? Take all of their stuff at a rate of 20%, hold on to it, and then sell it all back to them once the resources go away. And Pharaoh's like, this sounds like a good idea. Well, yeah, it's a great idea. But God's put him in this place to be ready to give an answer to Pharaoh. God could have given this dream to anyone, right? God could have given this dream to Joseph. But he gives this dream to Pharaoh so that Pharaoh can then see what God is doing in Joseph's life. There's a couple things here as we think about readiness. And the first one is this. It's the humility of Joseph. The humility of Joseph. Did you see what happens? It's a minor interaction, but Joseph goes up before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, I've heard that you can interpret dreams. It's been said about you that you know these things. Do you know how easy it would have been for Joseph to say, yeah, get me out of prison and I'll do that for you, right? Yeah, I can do this. I'm kind of a special dude. So, take care of me a little bit here, right? But he doesn't. And he takes a risk. Because if he pumped himself up, he could kind of have Pharaoh over a barrel. Yeah, I am the only one who can. None of your people can, but I can. So what are you going to do for me? But instead, it's total humility. It's not me. It's God that has this interpretation. And we've seen this over and over in Joseph's life. He's rising to prominence in Potiphar's house, but it's not him. It's God that Potiphar sees at work through him. Last week in interpreting the cupbearer and the baker's dream, oh my gosh. Is everybody awake? Do we need to do the wave or something? When he's interpreting their dreams, what's going on? He's saying, this is not coming from me. It belongs to God to interpret these things. And he says the exact same thing. This takes trust to do this. It means God's got to come through because I'm not building myself up. Are you a humble person? Are you characterized by humility in your life? Are you characterized by not pointing to, yeah, I am really great at this? Are you characterized by making sure that people see God at work and not how great you are? Now, what I don't mean by humility is the person who says, oh no, I'm terrible at everything. That's not humility. Honestly, that's more look at me. Convince me that I am really good, right? No, humility is, I'm not going to talk about how great I am. I'm going to talk about how great God is. That's what Joseph chooses to do here. At a time where all of his instincts would have been self-preservation, right? I finally have the chance. I don't want to blow it. But he chooses, I'm not going to pump myself up. Is that how you go about your life too? Readiness for God's timing means developing this character in us, humility, but also graciousness. I picture Joseph walking right by the cupbearer who forgot him for 2 years as he goes to talk to Pharaoh. And what kind of a look does Joseph give him? He could have really easily been vindictive here. Oh, you forgot about me for 2 years? And now suddenly when all else fails, now you're going to come call on me? Look, Pharaoh, I'll help you, but I'm not going to help you with that guy around. Send him back to prison where I was. Let's do a prisoner swap, and then I'll help you, right? But he doesn't do any of that. There's a lot of times where we like to make a big show of being right about things. And I want you to know I was right and you were wrong. And we feel justified in our anger or our bitterness or our jealousy or our pride or our vindictiveness. But the mature person, the growing person, doesn't have to point out how right they are. The growing person finds maturity in being gracious when you could be malicious. Do you make others around you look good? Do you look for the benefit of the doubt to overcome petty frustrations with people? Or are you keeping a list? And you know the names on that list, the people who have wronged you. Joseph is characterized by graciousness when he could be malicious. And then there's connection with God. How did Joseph have this whole plan together when he comes walking in and doesn't even know what the dream is? Well, it's because he's connected with God and God's giving him the interpretation and what to do with it. He's ready. I guarantee Joseph didn't walk in there and go, all right, God, haven't talked to you in a couple years, so hopefully we can still do this dream thing, right? No, he's maintained connectedness with God all the way through. Man, there have been some times in my life where, being totally honest, I walked into a situation and had no idea what I was supposed to say or do in the situation. Early on in ministry, I was just talking to somebody recently about this. I was at a church, and I've been the youth pastor there for a little while, and the senior pastor was going out on a hunting trip and was gone for a week, no communication, like horseback ride out. And he called me on the way to the airport and he says, I need you to go meet with somebody about doing a funeral. This was my first job in ministry. I think I was 24 at the time. I'd never done a funeral, hadn't been involved in planning a funeral or anything like that. And he said, so it's this person, this lady had been coming to the church for a little while. She had twin boys. And we knew the situation because she was estranged from her ex. He had been abusive, and we had to be careful in case he showed up at church trying to get the boys, so we had extra security. So I knew the situation. She had to go to a women's shelter to get away from him. There was a restraining order against him and all of that. He committed suicide, and she felt like her boys needed some closure by having a service for their dad. So go meet with them and plan this. I don't know what to say. And I remember just driving there in the car to meet with her and just praying furiously with God. Like, not angrily, but just like, God, you've got to fill me with some words here, because I don't know where to go. I don't know what to say. I remember another time where I got the call that a young family who had a baby who was born with a heart defect, and the baby died at 67 days old, and got a call of, they just found out, and can you just come over to the house for a little while? I don't know what to say. With that one, I circled the block a couple times because I hadn't finished my prayer time with God. We don't know what to say. We don't know what God's leading us into. Joseph walked into this not knowing what's the dream going to be, what's the interpretation going to be, but he was relying on God 100%. Connection with God. Practice it in the normal times, then it's going to be there when the extraordinary happens. It's already strong. That's the readiness that's in our hands. So let's talk a little bit about the waiting process. Waiting allows us to grow, gives us the opportunity to grow. The last verse I think is really interesting, verse 38 of Genesis 41. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit?" In whom is the Spirit of God, the Ruach Spirit of Elohim, God, is what's written there. Do you know the last time in the Bible that we saw the Spirit of God, the Ruach of Elohim? It's in creation, Genesis 1:2. The Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. We see it there, and then the next time, it's when the pagan king of Egypt looks at Joseph and says, "The Spirit of God is in this guy." There's been a maturing going on. People have been treating Joseph all sorts of ways, but he's been growing in the middle of it. So let's talk about what that growth looks like. Waiting allows us to grow by trusting God. When we fully let go of our timing, our control, we're demonstrating real faith. If you and I are going on a trip and you say, "I'm going to book all the travel, I'm going to take care of it, it's going to be a great trip," and I say, "Great, I trust you. I'm just going to also book my own flights and my own hotels in case you don't come through. But I totally trust you." That isn't trust. And yet, how often do we do exactly that with God? "All right, God, I trust you. You've got it under control, but I'm going to go ahead and make my own plans too." Waiting for God's timing allows us to build our trust. Do you trust God's plans when it takes a long time? Or once the waiting starts, does the trust go down? Waiting allows us to grow by experiencing God's breakthroughs. When we wait, God can do things that we'd never expect. If it happened in our timing, it's what we could expect. But when it's God's timing, when it's God's way, then things happen that we couldn't have ever planned for. This day that we're looking at in Joseph's life, this is the most unbelievable transformation in somebody's life. We thought it was a bad day when he went from his dad's favorite to being thrown in a pit and sold into slavery. But this ascension to power that he's having here, and spoiler alert for next week, he's about to become second in command of all of Egypt on this day. That's where it's going. He goes from a slave in a foreign place who's accused of one of the worst things you could be accused of and is rotting in prison to second in command of all of Egypt, the most powerful nation in the entire ancient world in that region at the time. He never could have seen that coming. It was because God did it in his timing that he could do something that Joseph could never have expected. Isaiah 40:31 is often a encouragement prophecy, an encouragement of how God treats us, because it talks about these things that we really want. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles, run and not get tired, walk and not become weary. God, I need you to infuse me with that life. But did you notice how you get it? By waiting on the Lord. And that word wait has intentionality behind it. Some translations say hope in the Lord. But the idea of that hoping is you're waiting for God to do it, believing that he can and that he will. We want the breakthrough, but it's the waiting that leads to God doing things in his time that we could never have imagined in our time. Waiting allows us to grow by taking time for the basics as well. Waiting isn't just sitting there drumming your fingers in prison. All right, well, God, at some point you're going to do something, so I'm just going to sit here and wait until you do it. No, waiting is active. Waiting is engaging in what I already know God wants me to be doing. Waiting is growing that connection with him. Waiting is reading his word, understanding him better. Waiting is growing in community. Connecting with your home group. If you aren't in a home group, let us know. Let us connect you into a home group, because some of us are still waiting for the next thing that God has for us, but we're not supposed to do it alone. We're meant to do it together in community, growing where we are. And the last thing, waiting allows us to grow by galvanizing our faith. When steel's galvanized, it's covered in a thin layer of zinc. And the zinc reacts to the air by creating then this hard surface that doesn't allow corrosion to go in and destroy the metal underneath. And what winds up happening then is you have the strength of the steel without the corrosion that gets in, right? And sometimes our faith needs that hard outer coating that keeps the corrosion of the world out. And when we wait, when we do it intentionally, then our trust in God's timing is that protective coating, that protective layer around our faith that allows it to stand firm no matter what the world throws at us. You know, there undoubtedly was a part of Joseph that was still clinging to the fact that I believe that God is still going to somehow bring about the culmination of the dreams that he gave me when I was a kid. He was holding on to that even in the difficult times, because we know what we'll see later on is Joseph hasn't forgotten. You remember what God has promised. You need to be reminded in the difficult times. You know, I've told the story before, but Zoe and I 100% know God brought us here for a reason. And it was in his timing. It was way later than the timing that we were anticipating and expecting, but it was right in his perfect timing for us to come here. And we need to cling to that when things are difficult. And remember, no, but God has us here for a reason. If you're married, when you said, I do, that person became God's person for you. You've got to cling to that knowledge even when things are difficult. You hold on to that. You remember, this is who God has for me. And yes, it's difficult, but we're going to work on this because this is who God has for me. This is what God has for me. Waiting lets us grow by strengthening, protecting our faith. So let's talk about a so what for us as we close our time together. 3 things, pretty obvious, flowing right out of what we've been talking about. The first one is, are you running ahead of God? Are you running ahead? Do you get frustrated when God doesn't do things in your time? Or do you make plans in case God doesn't come through for you? Or are you really trusting in God? Maybe today's prayer for you is, God, I'm going to quit running and I'm going to start trusting. God, I can't control the timing. The timing's in your hands. I'm just going to stay ready. Are you running ahead of God? Are you growing while you wait? Maybe you're in a place right now where you feel like you don't know what's next or when the next step's going to happen, and so you're just kind of waiting. Are you idly waiting? Or are you growing? How are the basics in your life? How's your humility? How's your graciousness and how you treat others? How's your connection with God? Are you growing while you wait? And then the last thing is your faith galvanized? Is it protected against the corrosion of the world? What do you need to put in God's hands today? Would you join me as we pray? And God, I thank you for the example of Joseph, of waiting well through horrible circumstances. I thank you for the reminder that in your time you do incredible things, things that we never could have anticipated. So God, I pray this morning for the faith to trust you with the situations that we're facing today, God. I pray that we won't run ahead of you. Pray that we won't make our own contingency plans. Pray that we will trust in you, in your timing, every step of the way. We thank you that you are the same God who came through for Joseph. We can trust you in the same way. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, amen. Amen. Thank you for coming. We'll start Revive right over here in about 10 minutes or so. Enjoy some 49ers themed food in the lobby, and we'll start over here. Thanks for coming.